we are going to have the next presentation now by
Nemu.
Bachelor in History and Philosophy of Science and Medicine from Manchester University. And he's going to present what I consider one of the highlights of our day, because it has to do also with what is happening here in England now regarding the Santo Daime branch. So,
thank you. So I'm here to talk about what's going on in England. We can do that. And we're going to look at how ayahuasca has been absorbed and ingested by England as a whole, what kind of wonder it's produced, what kind of nausea, what kind of reactions have been provoked, and what kind of mystery has been revealed in England. And we're going to look through the three lenses. We're going to look through the media, and we're going to look at how the law has reacted to ayahuasca, and we're also going to look through my eyes as a practitioner for the last 10 years of Santo Daime. Everyone seems to have a reaction towards ayahuasca. There was a woman I met yesterday. I sat down next to her and she was talking to someone else, and she said, yeah, I'd like to try ayahuasca. One thing I know is I don't want to do it with Santo Daime. And she turned to me and she said, are you one of them? And I said, well, what have you heard? She said, oh, not very much. She said, it's a new drug. And I said, it's not really new, is it? So my own experience with Santo Daime, I started drinking in Japan in 2001. I stayed there a number of years, and it was a very interesting brew. And I started writing a book, partly looking at the different medical cosmologies, how kind of indigenous people look at disease and health and recovery, and also how Western medicine looks at it, and how those two different types of medicines are given different status in our cultures. So that's something I'm going to want us to think about today. So I drank for some time in Japan, and then I moved to Brazil, to the Amazon, to get a closer look at the medicine, or at the sacrament rather. And there I was editing my book, and I got bitten by a sandfly, and the bite turned into a pimple, and then into a boil, and then into a bacterial colony called leishmaniasis, and it's a flesh eater, and it kind of opened up a hideous wound in my chest. So I got a very good chance to study the medicine up close, and everyone around me, all the doctors, advised me that I have to take injections of antimonium tartrate, which is a heavy metal. And also the locals as well, they thought I was crazy, mad gringo in the jungle. We didn't know what we were doing, because I decided to use ayahuasca in the form of daime, and I did that over 6 months. And I came back and published my book, and then I wrote this article for the Psychedelic Press UK, and I'm going to share that with you now. So daime hit England in the 90s, and as you've heard already, the situation is vague. The law is vague. There's a grey area there, but unlike some other countries, it hasn't been tested. Unlike some other countries, it hasn't been tested in the courts, like it has been in Holland, like it has been in the States. And also, like some other countries, it hasn't been tested, but it seems all right. They're not clamping down. In England, beginning in summer last year, our sacrament was seized at the borders, and then in August and September there were some arrests around the country. One person has been charged, and 5 people are on bail. And their bail has been put back, and the court date has been put back. The laws are old, but the situation is new. So the Crown Prosecution Service hasn't really decided how it's going to prosecute the law. So they're looking at that at the highest level at the moment, right at this moment. So we should know in a few weeks which way things are going. Seeing as these cases are unresolved, I can't really talk very much about what's going on in the legal area, but I can talk about what's going on in the press. So, media interest began not with this article, with another article, which was in the Independent, and it was very interesting. This article. It was a guy in a community, in a Daime community, and he was doing a session, and he heard question asked introspectively, "What are you doing here?" And that was the first thing ayahuasca said to the British press. "What are you doing here?" And his answer was, "I'm here to write a story." But that wasn't satisfactory. He meditated some, experienced life as a tree, and then wrote a very even-handed, even-branched article on ayahuasca, and kind of set the mold for reporting, which kind of began with, generally, in a number of articles, this one in the Telegraph, for example, begins with a more or less attention-grabbing headline. Now let us hallucinate, in this case it's 2005, and then goes on to describe either terror or wonder, or sometimes being weirded out by this strange cult. And by the end of the article, and by the end of the session, and the experience has come around to a more open-minded or optimistic reflection on Daime. For example, this guy, he won't be drinking it again, but he did say, why shouldn't they do what they do at the end of his article. This is Santo Daime, the Drug-Fueled Religion, 2008, which, despite the headline, was actually fairly even-handed as well, same kind of idea, concluding with the words, with some respect for these kind and thoughtful, I think that's what he said, kind and thoughtful people. Next one, please. The busts happened in, like I said, August and September. This was a piece from This is South Devon, which is a fairly even-handed, simple reporting of the event. And notice how they say sacred. So they're pointing out, even in quotes, that there's a sacred aspect to the medicine, and that's quite a nice thing to do. This one is from the Sun. Mind-busting jungle drug hits UK. Now, in this article, this is DMT. DMT is not a jungle drug. It's a synthetic drug, as you will know. Ayahuasca is a kind of mind-busting in a certain sense, but perhaps not in the sense that they're thinking of here. It was a mix of all kinds of things, and it's compared DMT to crystal meth, saying it's the biggest threat to the UK since crystal meth. Right, where are we going now? All right, next one, please. These are some mind-busting jungle drug fiends in ritual. In Flor de Sel, one more please. These are some more. This is another one. This is a mind-busting jungle wedding. These are the original mind-busters. These are Kashinawa Indians who came to visit our church and gave a ceremony there, or they sang their songs there. Very beautiful indeed. I've done a session with this guy. We did a cura, like a cure for a relative of his, which was half Santo Daime, and then these people singing their songs. They sing like this. A bit like that. Right, there was one article which broke the mould, and that was even before the busts, and that was a Guardian correspondent, and I've forgotten the name of the article, but he went to Rio Branco, and he spent 2 days in Rio Branco. He didn't like it at all. The first day he went to a brothel. And he didn't like it. The second day he went to a Barquinha session. Now Barquinha is a different line of, it's not my line, it has similar routes but went down a different direction. Very beautiful direction. They use, they have much more influence from the African pantheon, from the Orishas, what Edward was talking about before, the transpossession, and the mediums open themselves up to the spirits and will walk around like slaves or run around like children, and they do things which are quite strange to a naive perspective. And this guy, this is a quote, "My Daime wasn't working, so I went outside and swigged another glass. And then it kicked in. I lost control of my jaw, I lost control of my legs, and he started stumbling around, and I've actually seen this happen in Barquinha. A friend of mine, quite a tall guy, about a foot taller than everyone else there, very pale, bald-headed, lost control of himself, and the women were crossing themselves. It's quite strong, sometimes quite strange for us gringos. The gringos are quite often strange for the Daimistas as well. So it's a very complex cultural interaction that's going on at the moment. This guy, this correspondent, he then forgot whether he was a man or a woman, and he was fine, he ended up in his bed, he had to sleep with the lights on. Now, when you talk to a Brazilian about, this guy lost control of his legs, the immediate thought is, well, who had control of his legs? And so it's a very different idea of how spirits interacted with people. Yes, next one. This is a Peruvian newspaper announcing that ayahuasca has been given the status of cultural patrimony of the country. That means it's considered a cultural treasure, much like perhaps the Sphinx or Buckingham Palace is a cultural treasure. And the next one, please. This is the wording of that, and I'm going to read it. That plant is known in the indigenous Amazon world as a sage or teacher plant, showing initiates the very fundaments of the world and its components. The effects of its consumption constitute the gateway to the spiritual world and its secrets. It is indispensable to those who assume the role of privileged carriers of these cultures. Now, this is in the legislature of Peru. And try and imagine that in the British legislature. It would never happen. It sounds quite superstitious. So let's have a little think about that. It is tempting to think that in the third world countries like Brazil and Peru, where they have shamans and psychic surgeons and mediums and all kinds of things going on, a church on every block in some places, that they are superstitious and they are not bound by the dictates of science and rationalism. So let's see if England has lived up to the scientific methodology and the ideals of rationalism which were born in this country. And we're going to look at that by going back to 2009, and the headline's nutsacked when Professor David Nutt announced that he was the head of the ACMD, the Advisory Council on the Misuse of Drugs, and he announced that the findings of his council did not support the recriminalisation or the rescheduling of cannabis. That was a scientific opinion, and he was a respected scientist. He was sacked. Following year, 2010, was the mephedrome. I said that wrong. Sorry, mephedrome scandal, and 2 people resigned from the ACMD, the advisory committee, saying that the press wielded more power than the scientists. And the press were reporting, well, they got the name wrong from Wikipedia. They said that a teenager had ripped his scrotum out. That was a joke written on a blog that was reported in the press. 180 kids off school in one school, and a number of deaths, including 2 deaths reported in March. The ban on this drug went through in April, and the toxicology reports on those deaths came out the following month, saying they hadn't taken it at all. But the ban had gone through. So anyway, these 2 scientists resigned. And I'm going to tell you about a new piece of I'm going to tell you about a new piece of legislation which is coming in now, and that is it's called the Police Reform and Social Responsibility Act. And what it does is it makes changes to the 1971 Misuse of Drug Act, which I'm going to read here. The members of the Advisory Council, this is what it says at the moment. The members of the Advisory Council, of whom there shall be not less than 20, shall be appointed by the Secretary of State after consultation with such organisations as he considers appropriate. Now, that's staying in the Act. What's being cut out of the Act is specifying that these people be scientists and specifying that they should have some knowledge of misuse of drugs and wide and recent knowledge of the misuse of drugs. So what's basically happening is the scientists have been taken out of the process of legislation. Right, so just going back to Brazil, what happened in Brazil when ayahuasca was banned, they employed scientists for a year to study all kinds of parameters and looked at their report and decided that ayahuasca was to be legalized And in the English situation, they sacked their advisors and made changes to legislature, which meant that they don't have to have any scientific advisors anymore. I want to talk very quickly about there's some herbal medicine laws coming in Europe next month, I think. April. There's something like 400, I don't know how many, medicines are going to be not be available on the shelves, and these are things like St. John's wort. Now, if you've been using it because your grandmother was using it and her grandmother was using it, that's a lineage much like ayahuasca is, and I don't have much time, but what I'm going to say is St. John's wort is not going to be available anymore. It will have to be tested, and
it will be by statutory regulation.
Thank you. It's not going to be available on the shelves. Thank you. And it's the regulations state that it must be tested, and the test costs something like £100,000 per medicine, and that really isn't fair. And actually, if you look closely at how tested pharmaceuticals perform in hospitals, 106,000 deaths in 1 year in the States from properly administered drug, 6.7% of adverse drug reactions in 1 year in the States in the hospitals. So it looks like the standards for evaluating scientific medicines and herbal medicines, and ayahuasca in our case, are not very sound. But there is some optimism. There's cause for optimism, and this man is cause for optimism, because the political machine in England, I suppose, there are a lot of mostly ex-politicians. This guy is the Chief Constable of North Wales, and he has come out saying that the drug laws need to be they're immoral. That's what he said. They're immoral. A whole bunch of scientists: Bob Ainsworth, ex-Labour Home Office. Peter Lilly, ex-Tory Cabinet, Chief Constable, that guy, Nigel Lawson, the ex-Chancellor of the Exchequer, they all come out against the drug policy, saying things like all drugs should be legalised, or we need a radical overhaul. The all-party parliamentary group on drug policy reform, including lots of fantastic people, including the last DPP, the Director of Public Prosecution, who is the guy who decides how the law should be prosecuted, which is kind of what we're thinking about at the moment. So in politics, it's not looking all that bad, although certain politicians are a bit slower on the uptake. Next one, please. In the press, here's one I made earlier. The press are interested in sensational stories. Of course, the press like sensational stories. Man smiles as he realises everything is connected. Now, one of the things about ayahuasca is it is already sensational. And there are lots of reports that come back from individuals, and some of them end up in the newspapers, and some journalists go down and they investigate, and they come back with absolutely glowing reports. And I'm going to quote one from, next one please, not from the Sun, no, leave that one. From Rupert Murdoch, another one of Rupert Murdoch's, I don't know what you call him, industries, I guess, Fox News, which said, thousands of cases in which people have been healed of physical, mental and emotional disorders, and many curious cases of recovery from grave and even fatal disorders. This is Bruce Parry, who had a very widely televised performance test, among other things, but he said it was one of the most profound experiences imaginable, or more correctly, unimaginable, as it is almost defined by its inexplicability. Inexplicability. So we have a story here which is intrinsically ineffable. We have a substance here which breaks down our boundaries about what's right and what's wrong, what we should be doing, how we should be thinking about things. And you know, this is the idea of all the problems of the press. The press is thousands of people doing, or tens of thousands of people, all doing different types of things, and occasionally one of them comes upon ayahuasca and sees it as it really is. Ayahuasca is responsive. So if you approach it with open mind and respect and wonder, it will give you those things back. If you approach it the day after going to the brothel, you might not have such a good time. So that's where I'm going to end it. I just want to say one thing, which was in answer to a question before about what can people do to help. It's very kind that people want to help, I went to one session which was, doesn't matter about that session. If you'd like to help, really the best thing to do is not start a movement, please. We're trying to keep things, they're going quite well at the moment. We have cause for optimism, and if you could perhaps think very kindly and with shimmering light on the politicians, that might be one thing you could do. We're not asking for money, but there are legal costs. So if you want to inquire about how to help with legal costs, you should email 3daime, Daime is D-A-I-M-E, at gmail.org. No, one back. Gmail.com. This is a plug. Some of the things I've said in my text need citations, and you can find them on my blog, which is here. Thank you very much.